in light of national events that it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to be like, yeah, ignoring that, let's just concentrate on what we're doing. But actually, I think it's important at times of national significance to take stock, to see what goes on around us as an opportunity to see God afresh. And so we're actually going to be talking next Sunday about vision, which is useful because all this week we'd love to invite you to pray with us as we seek God for what we're going to be sharing and what we're going to be doing together. So that's what's happening there. But Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 to 5. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away." And he who was seated on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." This is God's word. We're going to be looking together at themes of permanence and patriotism and pomp and processions and princes and portals and anything else I can think of to be beginning with the letter P, vaguely related to monarchy. Today's letter is the letter P. But we're going to be considering particularly the concept of the pomp and the portal and the permanence of the world. To start with, the pomp of the portal. The pomp is a portal. And that word pomp, it gets annoying to say quickly, and it may be annoying and frustrating to listen to. But as a nation, we are very good at pomp and ceremony, aren't we? My concept and comment this morning is that pomp is meant to be a portal, a lens and a window through which we see and grasp something that is true and deeper than what we observe on the surface. Now, last week and in the weeks to come, no doubt, we'll see a fair amount of processions of people dressing up in historic costumes, of cannons being fired, of horses on the streets of London, of people wearing big bearskin hats, of jets flying, and potentially, like we did in the past, the palace being turned into a giant cinema. The question is, why do we do all of this as a people? Why do we put on all these great displays? What's the point of all the pomp? For many, the point of all the pomp and ceremony that we do is to underline and underscore the importance of patriotism, another P. Or it's to underline and underscore the importance and significance of a national narrative, the British Empire, to retell that story of who we are. Patriotism, of course, isn't a bad thing, and we'd probably do well to recover a greater sense of love for our country and appreciation of what we have. Over the last 50 or 60 years, we seem to have corroded that. It seems to no longer be something that we're allowed to do, is to be patriotic as a people. It's not necessarily wrong. It has a place. In the past, particularly going back as far as like the Roman Empire, they would put on great displays of processions of armies marching, and in their rear kind of the conquered representatives of conquered nations coming in their train as a demonstration of the power of that great people. They'd put on processions. And so every country, every civilization has ways of telling their story and of making significant events that have gone on around them by using triumph and glory and images and dressing up and marching bands and symbols and red arrows of various kinds. But in the Bible, ancient Israel also had displays of pomp and celebration, grandeur. But the point of the pomp, and that's the last time I'm going to say that word, the point of the pomp in ancient Israel was different than it is for many of us, and certainly for our nation. The point of the pomp, I can't stop saying it, in the Bible was to teach the people about God, about what he's like. It was to teach them about holiness, It was to teach them about a separation between us and God. The royal symbols, the demonstrations of grandeur and glory was to create a separation between God and the people, and for us to understand how far removed from us he is. It was to put on display the original hierarchy that exists in the universe, that there is God in the heavens, and he is far above us. His thoughts are not our thoughts, his ways are not our ways, and he is not accountable to us. We are beneath him. And processions and celebrations and demonstrations of glory had that point in the Bible. It was to teach people about holiness and about sin, and it was to point people always to the reality of God's promise to one day bring about redemption. That was the point of all the pomp in the Bible. But the other reality to consider is that the pomp, the processions, it acts as, and it is, a portal into ultimate reality. We're meant to look at the demonstrations of grandeur and splendor, and we're meant to see through it to something truer. You see, as with a window, you can walk past a window and you can catch your own reflection and check your hair and see if your shirt is buttoned up properly and creased or not, only to then realize that there are people on the other side of the window staring back at you. But you can do that with a window. You can stare at a window and see yourself, or you can look through it to see something else. So it is with a lot of the things that we see in the Bible, and so it is with the monarchy and the displays of grandeur and splendor and processions that we put on. You see, we could stare at the Queen and marvel at her service, her faithfulness, her devotion, her self-sacrifice, and commenting and acknowledging those things is useful and important, of course. Or we could share fun trivia about the Queen. We could, reflect on her life and tell amusing anecdotes. We could say, did you know the Queen was fluent in French? Or that she sent her first tweet in 2014? Or that she has a cushion in her parlor that says it's great to be Queen, that she sits on. We could send and share fun trivia like that about her. Or we could look beyond her to what she herself is pointing at, viewing her and using her only as a window to marvel at the God that she represents and the God, as we've been hearing, that she worshipped and is worshipping now. And this way of approaching the Queen to look beyond her to God is perhaps something that she would have wanted. On her Christmas Day address in 2014, she said, "The life of Jesus Christ is an inspiration and an anchor in my life." And the royal biographer, William Shawcross, he said that the two things that stand out about the Queen is her constant sense of duty and her devotion to God. So yes, the Queen would want us to look upon her, but also to be drawn beyond her to see Jesus, the one who in our reading is still on the throne and who will always be on the throne. He says, the one who is seated on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." There is one on the throne. So the point of it all is to remind us of the one who is still on the throne, who is making all things new. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to consider perhaps what many of us have considered during the last few days, and it's to consider permanence. That for a lot of us, the feeling that we felt when we first heard the news, and maybe ever since, is that we grieve a loss of permanence in the world, or a loss of a sense of stability. In verse 1 of what we read, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." What we see in the Bible, in this scripture, and what we've learned over the last few days, is that nothing is permanent. Not even earth is permanent. A friend of mine was saying that on Friday, a number of her colleagues were in tears at the news of the Queen's death. And as they cried, they said, "I'm just so sad because I thought she'd be here forever. She felt like a national figure that would never leave." And one journalist wrote about the Queen's death. In a headline, he said, "The Queen's death will shake this country deeply because she was a steady center amid constant flux." Prime ministers and presidents and revolutions came and went, but she seemed to remain the same. She'd she'd lived through many changes. The transition from country estates being of importance to the kind of devolution of the colonies, the rise literally of aeroplanes and of televisions and changing of laws, 15 prime ministers, all of those things came and went, but she seemed to just stay the same and be there forever. Now, speaking personally, the Queen's not had, I wouldn't think, a big impact on my life. I'm certainly not a royalist. But what I have observed over the last few days is how much she added to the structure of my reality and my experience of the world. People in places of authority like that, they create the structure, the stability within which a lot of life takes place. And that creates security for us. That's part of the reason why they've been so quick to trip over themselves to quickly appoint the next king. Because they understand that the role of the monarchy is to preserve structure and stability in a country. But nevertheless, nothing lasts forever. Nothing is permanent. Your body, every cell in your body regenerates every 10 years. You are a completely different person than you were 10 years ago. Decay and entropy covers the world like a thick dust from some volcanic explosion, or after you've done some DIY and you wonder, how did dust get there? How has this affected everything? But decay and entropy, returning to a settled state of nothing, that is the norm, and that covers everything. We live in a world of death. We live in a world of decay. And people like the Queen and the monarchy are meant to help guard us and protect us against that painful reality. In Ecclesiastes 3, which I have to say is probably my favorite book in the Bible, if you're allowed to have a favorite. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says this. I'll just read it off here. Can't find it, someone's moved it. It says, I have seen the burden that God has laid on the human race. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I have seen the burden that God has laid on the human race. Beauty and the sense of eternity is a burden that God lays on us as people. And it's a burden because it's heavy to carry. To consider your own temporality, the fact that you're going to die, to consider that is terrifying for us. We distract ourselves with smartphones and Netflix and all sorts of things to stop us thinking about the reality that you are going to die. You are decaying. It is a certain fact that you won't exist in 70, 80, 90, 100 years' time. You won't be sitting here. You won't be doing anything on earth in quite the same way because you're dying. I'm dying. That's a true statement that that's not news to any of us, but it's a burden because God has put in the world both beautiful things that enchant us and we love and we don't want to hold on to beauty because it captivates us, but also He's set within our hearts in eternity. Our experience of the present, the moment-by-moment existence, is an experience of eternal reality in the world. The fact that you experience a longing for eternity in your hearts, the fact that the present moment feels like it goes on forever and ever and ever, is because there is an experience to come where time itself will have passed away, and God will be all, and God will be all that's all. God will be all there is. C.S. Lewis famously said that the reason you experience thirst is because there is such a thing as drink, and the reason you experience hunger is because there is such a thing as food. And so the reason you crave for and long for beauty and eternity is because there is such a thing as the ultimate beauty that never perishes and the moment that never ends in God. In the passage in Revelation 21, what we see is that there is an experience of preparation that takes place. He says, the heaven and earth has passed away. And he goes on to say, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Our experience of longing for things to be permanent, but recognizing and learning that things aren't permanent, isn't a problem, because actually it's teaching us that God is preparing things, that everything that goes on is a part of the preparation that God is putting into place. Earth and sky are passing away once all of the preparation that God has planned is done. History is moving towards a final destination. It's from Christianity that we even get the language of progress. And to be a progressive is first to be a Christian, because ours is a progress that is heading towards a final reality where God, having prepared everything, is going to unite heaven and earth again. That God is going to come and dwell with his people. But our progress isn't a progress towards a moral, social utopia that can't exist outside of God. Our progress is a progress towards that end, when God is united with his people. But here's the good news, is that if nothing is permanent in the world, neither is death permanent. If nothing is permanent in the world, then not even death is permanent. Death is not a full stop at the end of life's sentence, but a semicolon, moving from one phrase to another. Before death, God is preparing. He's preparing, Jesus says, a room for us to dwell in with him. He's preparing also us for himself, just as a bride prepares herself for her groom, going to great length out of a desire to be with her groom and to present herself radiant and splendent to her groom. So God says that he is preparing you and me for himself, and using everything that happens to us as a means towards that preparation. And to say that a bride takes care in preparing herself for her husband is when a bride approaches her wedding day, doing all that she can to prepare herself, to make herself as most beautiful and radiant as she can for her husband. In doing so, she's not behaving in that way in order to conform to some, oppressive social norms of femininity that she must live under. No, in preparing herself, she's acknowledging that she is her husband's delight. And she wants to do all that she can to meet the delight and desire of her husband, because just as she desires him and he desires her, there's a preparation that goes on for each other in an exclusive union together. A friend of mine, she described herself preparing for her wedding day. And she said that her wedding dress was, she made her own wedding dress, and a friend of hers sewed onto it all of the jewels, hand sewn one by one, all of these dozens of different jewels that she had, all different shapes and sizes, and some of them with different meanings to her. And she was so excited. She described the coming of her day. She was so excited because she so longed to prepare and present herself to her husband, who she delighted and was so looking forward to being with. And everything was meticulously prepared and planned for that moment. Everything that on her dress meant something to her in her excitement to be united with her husband. That is how God is preparing you and me for himself. Everything that goes on in your life, God is using it to prepare you for him. Us as a people for himself. The church, the bride of Christ, for Christ. But the passage also points to a reality of permanence. There's a lot of things that aren't permanent, everything in the passage. God is preparing everything for himself, but there is one thing that is permanent. He says, I see everything passing away, but he, God, is there. And he, God, will wipe away, he says, every tear from their eyes. And death shall be no more. He, God, is permanent. In a world where everything changes, is in flux and is in decay, God himself is permanent. He remains. And his longing is to dwell, to live with, to know you and I deeply and intimately. He was there before creation, in the beginning, God. And he is there after creation when he's united with his people. He is permanent in a world of impermanence. He is the only king that will never die or suffer decay and death. And you see, just as he made creation in the first instance, so he's remaking creation. That's what it says here. He who's seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. But God, in his making of all things new, doesn't discard all of this and begin again. God's preparation into the newness is he takes the things of this world. He takes your individuality, and he's not preparing you to just be rubbed out as though your individuality doesn't matter and what you need is to just be absorbed into some oneness that cares nothing for you and knows nothing about you. No, instead, he's taking all of the particulars and peculiarities about you, the things that have been done to you, the things that you have done, the things that you're ashamed of, and he, rather than rubbing them out, he redeems them. And he uses those things as his raw ingredients to create something brand new. As it says at the end of Lord of the Rings, which is, we know second to the Bible in authority. As it says at the end of Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf is before the Hobbit says to him, is it now that all things are going to everything sad is going to become untrue? Everything sad is untrue. Because sadness is not what's most true about things. What's most true is that God is going to integrate and redeem and transform even the hardest things we go through to be something, a jewel in the bride's dress, to be something of significance and splendor. And if you've seen the film A Slumdog Millionaire, it centers around this person's winning of the lottery, but at the center of it, of the kind of relationship dynamics is between the boy and the girl from different parts of society who fall in love and are separated. And when they're eventually reunited at the end of the film, she comes to him head covered in feelings of shame, because in their time of separation, when he was experiencing all of the trials and tests that he did, she also had a rough ride and suffered an acid attack that left her face scarred. And when they're finally reunited, this couple that years ago had been in love and had been making promises together, they're reunited at the end of the film, but she's ashamed because of everything that's happened to her and how she looks. Her face slightly deformed by the acid attack and the scar that it had left. And what he does is beautiful. He takes her face in his hands and he kisses her scar, as though to redeem this thing that she's so ashamed of. But he says, I make new with my love for you. I redeem it. That's what God is going to do with everything sad in making it untrue that's happened to you and to me. All of the hard things that we walk through. And it's this king, who sits on the throne in the book of Revelation and says, behold, I am making all things new. It's this king that our queen will now lay her crown before, in humble acknowledgement that he is the true king. She was only ever a portal through which we could see something about hierarchy and royalty and holiness and glory. But it was only ever just a shadow and a window to the true. And now here she is before the one who says at the end of all things, I'm making everything new. I'm making everything sad is going to come untrue. I'm going to redeem everything that's ever gone on that's been hurtful and caused you to feel shame and grief. I'm making everything new, he says. And the Apostle Paul understood this dynamic as well, because he wrote to a church in Corinth that had gone through all kinds of trials, and he says to them that we used to observe Christ just like the flesh. We used to look at him and see a peasant. We used to look at him and see a nobody. And yet now we understand who he is. And he says, so it is that when we look at one another, we don't just see you and all of the difficulties that you're going through, all of your hang-ups and quirks and doubts and fears and frustrations. No, when you look at you and you're a Christian, Paul says, if anyone is in Christ, new creation. Behold, the new has come and is coming. Christ is the one who makes all things new. And on a weekend like this, and an occasion like this, and a time of national mourning, what are we mourning? We're mourning the reality of sin and death in the world. We're mourning the loss of stability and security in society for a moment. But we're also remembering that Christ came to forgive, to heal, to remove shame. And Christ is the King on the throne who promises that he will one day make all things new. It's part of his reward. He wants to make all things new, including you. That's our King. That's the one that our Queen is now kneeling before.